Live from Austin, Texas, this is Diversity Cafe, hosted by me, Angela Hood, CEO and founder of This Way Global. Our podcast features HR tech and recruiting experts that know our industry inside and out. They are the best of the best. Join us and enjoy a cup of your favorite brew and get the insight you need to meet recruiting and diversity challenges head on. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Angela Hood. I'm the founder and CEO of This Way Global. And today we have Cindy Jordan with us from Pyx Health. I am so excited to have you here. And I want you to start off with answering a very difficult question that I had to ask you, and you gave me such a great answer. Your technology addresses loneliness. Mm-hmm. Can you explain to us what or how you would define loneliness?
So, there's a lot of misconception out there about loneliness as if it's a state of being. But in fact, and it's very timely that you and I are having this discussion. There was an article in the New York Times last week that talked about the fact that loneliness is actually a chronic illness. And the science is catching up, right? Loneliness has a physical response in the brain, just like depression or bipolar or any of the other mental and behavioral health diagnosis we can think of. And so we at Pyx firmly believe that loneliness should be a diagnosable, treatable chronic condition.
Well, and you described it as, maybe I remember this incorrectly, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's when you believe you're experiencing a circumstance that no one else is experiencing.
That's right. Yeah, that's how, so there's a progression, right? It's like, usually there's some kind of an event that triggers it. Maybe it's a healthcare event or a change in circumstance. So you might go through a divorce or lose a partner or something like that. And you start to believe early on that no one can understand what you're experiencing. And then that starts to actually start the process in the brain, the rewiring, you go into the fight or flight, the release of cortisol, and you get yourself to the place where, we at Pyx call it stuck in mud, but where you can't help yourself, meaning you're not doing any self-management. You believe that you are the only person in the world that can possibly understand the experience. I read a scientific journal that called it that people who are suffering from chronic loneliness feel like they're in dire straits. That was the phrase that they used. And so that's where we at Pyx focus. We specifically target folks that are in an acuity of chronic loneliness. Because once you move them through that, does that mean that they're never going to be lonely again in their life? No. But it means you can get them back on a healthier path where they can start engaging with community and family, et cetera.
Well, and you said too, it's not the same as depression, and that people get these two kind of conflated with one another.
They do. Again, I'm going to keep saying this and I don't want to, but it's just incredible the attention and the resources that the pandemic brought to this issue. So lots and lots of studying going on around loneliness right now. Loneliness is actually the predicator often for, manic depression, manic bipolar, et cetera. And that really rings true in my personal experience. My stepdaughter in 2017 was diagnosed with bipolar and had this really horrible year. She ended up in an inpatient facility, but the journey to get there, these 12 months, she was in and out of the emergency room and we didn't know because she's obviously over 21. So no one's going to call us and tell us these things. She had dropped out of school. We didn't know until we got a letter months later. We saw her for Sunday dinners. We were engaged with her, but here she was suffering from what she would later describe as being very lonely. And it ended up causing all other kinds of problems. It caused essentially it put her into an acuity with her bipolar. She stopped taking her meds. She started using substance abuse, those kind of things. And so it was that year that made me look at loneliness and say, what in the world are we doing about chronic loneliness? And at the time, it was very little.
Well, and then, so fast forward to 2020, and we experience a world or a global pandemic.
That's right.
And so I'm a confirmed introvert, absolutely 100% introvert. So there was moments during the pandemic where I was like, this is kind of nice that I'm just, I get to sort of be with very small group of people in my bubble or whatever. But even and I think almost every other introvert that I talked to about this, that we all got anxious about just how secluded we were from other people.
Yep.
And yet we had the entire world was going through essentially the same thing. But I think there was a lot of people feeling loneliness during this, even though we were all in the same motion at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, and I think a lot of people felt depressed that hadn't felt depressed before, et cetera. And so your example is what I would call intermittent loneliness, right? Like it was caused by the pandemic. Generally speaking, you don't suffer from loneliness, even though you're an introvert. But because of the circumstance that you were in, you were suffering from loneliness. The difference is you were able to get yourself through it, right? So that's kind of the intermittent versus the chronic. The chronic is when, the norepinephrine in the brain gets to the point where you literally cannot help yourself.
Right. So chemicals have now taken over.
That's right.
They're driving forth the part that you started being lonely, but now it's going to sustain your loneliness.
Yeah. And the other thing that the pandemic did for loneliness, aside from start to actually put money into the issue, and that's what you and I just talked about, like people are studying it, there's more research being done about it, the stigma has been broken up a little bit, because to your point, Angela, like we were all lonely, at some point during that lockdown. But what it has done is that it has given people a sort of a platform to actually articulate that this is how I'm feeling. Before the pandemic, there was the UCLA put together the only evidence-based screening. So when you think about it more from a prescribable, like how do you know if someone's chronically lonely? The only screening that does that is called the UCLA loneliness screening.
Okay, good to know.
Yep. And so it's just like depression. If you want to find out if someone's depressed, you use the PHQ. If you want to find out if someone's chronically lonely, you use the UCLA. And that is also a way to measure if you can improve chronic loneliness and move people through. There is this, I literally believe, and I know this is easy as an entrepreneur to say this, but I literally believe that we are at the forefront of a category creation of what 5 years from now is going to be as treatable as depression is.
Well, and so I think, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, that part of us being able to address loneliness is us being able to recognize it.
That's
so
true.
I think just being able to talk about it more openly, because I don't think many people were as open, certainly not employers. And a lot of the people that follow our podcast are employers and recruiters. Yep. I don't know that it wasn't as acceptable to be able to talk about this at work and to be able to say I'm depressed or I'm lonely or I need a mental health day. Somehow the pandemic, I think because everyone started feeling it, maybe there was more empathy, but it created this opportunity for us all to be discussing it. And now maybe we can recognize it in ourselves.
Yeah, I think everybody, your listeners included, would agree that we're not going to go back to the way it was. And what's going to happen in this new hybrid world, the new philosophy about working, the new philosophy that we've all kind of embraced around mental health, is that you have to sort of see in this the signs and symptoms. So I'll give you an example. Like, when one of the actual sign or symptom of chronic loneliness is that people are up in the middle of the night, insomnia, aches and pains. So loneliness actually starts to translate into physical conditions in the body. So let's take it from the perspective of an employer. You have somebody who's calling in for a mental health day, maybe more than they used to, certainly more than the norm. And in fact, there's a study that says that people who suffer from chronic loneliness will take 3 times as many mental health days as those who don't. or they're going to the emergency room and having like MSK issues, particularly for self-insured employers, meaning my back hurts, but there's no attributable physical condition that caused that back pain.
What is MSK? I'm not familiar.
Skeletal admission.
Okay.
It literally is someone going to the ED saying, gosh, I have this pain in my back and I don't know what I did to it. And those doctors will try to find a source for it and see if you have a slipped disc or, a torn labrum or whatever it is, but there's no physical attribute. And that, coupled with other things like being up in the middle of the night, lost productivity, more mental health days, more sick days, frankly. And you have to start to ask yourself, gosh, that employee might be chronically lonely, particularly if they're working from home 100% or only coming in a couple days a week.
So if you have someone that's doing this, so let's just put yourself in the place of HR leadership or C-suite, and you're trying to figure out how do you address this with your company. I know that from just talking to recruiters on a regular basis, we have about 5,000 customers. And so and they're in about 27 different industries.
Yep.
So we see that this is coming up regardless of the type of company, the location of the company, the industry, it doesn't matter. I don't know what really to say to them. What is the recommendation when an employer brings this up to us, or they're having an internal discussion for, we can do X, Y, and Z?
Well, I mean, super self-serving, I'd say find a solution that looks like ours. I mean, we do particularly work with self-insured employers. It can't be, I think one of the common problems that we're doing, employers by and large want to tackle mental health. They do. I mean, their heart, their money, they're putting everything into that. You can see it everywhere. But it's just like physical health. Like you don't treat diabetes like you would COPD. You don't treat a broken arm like the way you would a concussion. And so you can't treat all the mental health issues like in one-stop shop. You can't say, here's an app, it'll make you feel better. There's lots of self-management in there, self-diagnose, find the library, do the exercises, and voila, you're not going to have any more issues. That's not going to work. You have to really start to look at your population. One of the things that we do is we have what's called the loneliness index, and we can literally take a population of people and say, hey, of your 5,000 employees, these 400 people are chronically lonely.
Wow.
Yeah. And so you really have to put effort and money and more importantly, belief into that this will be the way I will help, make life better for my employees. One of the things we've noticed is that when we treat chronic loneliness, there is an increase in uptick in EAP programs. So that's another way to think about it. Employers invest in EAP programs all over the place. And by and large, they're not used all that well. And so the question is not that your employees don't want to, or they're not great programs. It's that there's an underlying issue that's stopping them from doing that.
Really interesting. So like they are creating another barrier to them getting healthy.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, think about the last time you were sick or maybe weren't feeling all that well. How long did it take you to help yourself?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. And now imagine all what we just talked about. You're chronically lonely. It's going to take you twice as long, 3 times as long if you ever even do it.
Right. So let me just say this in case our listener is just listening and they actually can't see your background. So I'm going to explain what you would be able to see if you could see Cindy talking. She has this incredible rainbow. It's Pyxer. Isn't that his name?
Yeah, that's our bot, Pyxer.
A little bot called Pyxer. Pyx Health is PYX Health. So if someone were to come to Pyx Health and say, I'm an employer, and let's say we have 5,000 employees, what is it how would they work with you? Like, what would you do, and what would the experience be for their employee?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways we can work with employers and do. Some of them are, a little bit more ready to sort of look at claims, particularly if you're self-insured, look at diagnoses, look at PBM and say, and let us take that data. And when we take that data, we can come back and with almost nothing is 100%, but with a lot of certainty say, this is a group of employees that we think are likely in trouble. And then we can actually approach them and help them get onto the platform. However, a lot of employers don't feel comfortable doing that. And so they'll offer this as a self-select in. Now, about a year and a half ago, I would have told you that was going to fail miserably, but we're finding that that's not the truth. So even when you just do an email blast and it's not, we never say, hey, are you lonely? Here's the platform for you, because it's hard, particularly when you live in a household full of people, to admit to being lonely. What we say is, look, everyone needs a little help along the way, and this is the platform for you. And so what happens is you'll find that, and we've noticed that anywhere between 6 and 10% of the people that you directly market to are self-onboarding. What makes Pyx work is that it's not just the bot. We have a whole call center of licensed professionals, and they're either behavioral health technicians or peer support certified. And these folks will actually, when someone is chronically lonely, or they say they have an urgent social determinants of health need, and 1/3 of the employed workforce has an urgent SDOH need. I mean, just like really put that in your brain, meaning they need food, or they need housing, or they transportation. It is unbelievable how we think because you're collecting a paycheck, you're immune to these things. And that's not how it works.
You're saying a third.
A third of the employed workforce has
the American workforce is having this challenge. Yeah, I think that obviously we know it exists, but a third is just an enormous number.
It's huge. I mean, so when we uncover these things, we actually have human beings that will intervene. And the fact that they're not the employer's HR department, right? Or, they can talk with what we call them our Andys. It stands for authentic, nurturing, dependable, your friend. And Andy will get that employee anything they need, including providing companionship, and then including administering what we call our Thrive program. So when we find those chronically lonely, we put them in a program where we help them get through that stuck in mud syndrome.
Very interesting. Like a whole different level of retention motion for a company is, so you're providing them with an external resource that an employee can talk to confidentially and tell them what is really going on, and not have to be worried about how is that going to affect them at a professional level.
Yep. And the way that we're finding that people that, self-select into the platform in the employer space, there is a high, 70 some odd % of those folks are using our platform in the middle of the night. Again, back to insomnia being a symptom. And you know what they're doing? They're looking for resources, period. Like they're talking to the bot, but, because we load all of that with employer resources, EAP programs, interventions, like the stuff that the employer is already paying for. And that is what they're searching for. And the number one searched resource in the middle of the night by, of our employer clients is addiction treatment.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, so is it that I guess the loneliness is leading to more addiction, and then maybe they perceive that they're even lonelier after they're using, whether it be drugs or alcohol, it doesn't matter, but that loneliness cycle just continues and gets stronger?
Yeah. Remember, how we started, which is like, I'm in dire straits, I'm chronically lonely, and then add in some substance abuse. And the shame cycle associated with substance abuse. Right. That's what keeps people going back to it. I did it. I wake up. I called into work. I showed up late. I'm not, then I feel so bad about myself. I just do it all over. It's just that cycle, right? So yeah, they're hand in hand. Look, loneliness is the top 2 symptoms. And the list is long, but in things like diabetes, Alzheimer's, addiction, obesity, COPD, and then it just keeps, and then of course depression, anxiety, and the bipolar, some of the mental, it's like if someone said to you, hey, you can stop someone from going to the emergency room, being on lifelong meds, and overall just make them more healthy if you can just find them when they're suffering from loneliness. Like, I don't know an employer in the country that wouldn't do that.
Right. But I just think there's this lack of awareness. Certainly after you and I first met, we were introduced via one of the best private equity firms in the country, I think. And um, when I found out about what you were doing, I remember thinking my very first thought was, don't even know how I would describe loneliness. I don't even know,
Yeah.
like, I wouldn't be able to say to another person, this is what loneliness is. So I think just the fact that you've put a very clear definition around it will help some employers. But I think knowing from employees and knowing the stress that they are under right now, because they're trying to figure out, do they want to work from home? Do they have to go back in the office? What are the in between? How's school going to work out? Summer is coming. They don't know what's going to happen with the kids in school. I mean, just there's so many unknowns. Do you think that the employee can even take on more information right now and try to analyze themselves to self-identify that they're experiencing loneliness?
I think that they can self-identify that they're not right, they're not well. They may not say I'm chronically lonely, but that's why when we do marketing to employees in particular, we just talk about support, help, like connection to resources. Like we don't say, "Hey, are you lonely? Come get on." We know that there's a significant step between I'm not feeling right. I don't feel like anyone can help me. We haven't even talked about caregivers. I mean, we just got through a pandemic. You know how many of us in the workforce have become caregivers because of either a death over the last 2 years in the family, or somebody's gotten sick, or dealing with, long haulers or something. I personally have become a caregiver because, my stepdaughter, who I opened talking about, she passed away during COVID. And so my whole life has changed. And caregivers have a 90 some odd, it's like 92% chance of being chronically lonely. You want to talk about feeling like no one understands your plight. And our workforce is overwhelmingly caregivers right now. So yeah, it is hard to say I'm lonely, I need help. It's hard to say I'm suffering from depression, I need help. It's hard to say any of that stuff. It is very easy to say, I'm going to I'm going to take this step because I'm not feeling right. I'm going to take this step
Yeah.
because I think that there could, this could help me. And then once we get them in and we use evidence-based screenings and we use the bot to develop trust, then you start to actually uncover what people are really suffering from.
Well, and I know that, so I'm a military spouse, and when you're in active duty,
Yeah.
there's so much talk, and I say talk because that's what a lot of it is. There's so much talk about how to deal with mental health issues, whether that you are the active duty service person or whether you're the spouse or the children. But I do not think that it's as clear as what you're talking about right now. I think that's the part I really like about what Pyx Health does is you make it very, very clear that there is a way for an individual to start helping themselves without having to go through, I don't like HR, I don't want to talk to HR about this, or I don't want to talk to my boss about it, or my manager, or anyone else. It's very private if you're feeling a little off, regardless of what the reason is.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. And forget about a military organization or a paramilitary organization. My first job out of college, I was a police officer for 5 years. And there is a complete and utter culture that may say, hey, we want you, when you're involved in like a shooting incident or something horrible on the job, we want you to get mental health services. But there's really no action behind that, right? So there is a difference between lip service and actually really taking steps to help people address mental health issues. And the idea behind all of this is to get ahead of it, right?
Right.
Get ahead of it before I am literally worried about where our workforce is going to go. Because when we talk hybrid work, we're like, hey, look at this. Our productivity is up. Actually, people sometimes are working more because it's easy just to roll out of bed and go to the office down the hall. But what are the long-term effects? What's going to happen eventually, like 12, 18 months from now? Are we going to start seeing sort of an onslaught of physical health issues.
So if you can address, if you can, as an individual, if you can address that you're experiencing loneliness and you have a way to reach out, what is the difference between a person taking that action to help themselves versus them just continuing to let it go on and not addressing it for months on end? Like, what is the difference between those two outcomes?
Well, the short-term difference is going to be productivity, happiness in work, truly like just showing up. Like, so there'll be a progression. They'll stop being as productive as they were. I call it like the keyboard warrior. Like when we've been working from home for a while, we'll say anything on, through the keyboard that we wouldn't say to each other. You'll start to see little signs and symptoms like that. The worst is, and again, this was in the New York Times article and has a lot of science behind it, is that suffering from chronic loneliness for a long period of time gives you a 45% increase in getting Alzheimer's.
Oh my goodness.
It increases your mortality rate by 50%. It for fear of being dramatic, it will kill you.
Right.
Yeah. It killed my kid. I mean, legitimate. The last text she ever sent anyone in this world, she said she was lonely.
Wow.
And here I am running a loneliness company. There's a lot to take in there. And so it is something we have to take very seriously.
And so if a company says, okay, we hear what you say, Cindy, we believe it. I actually think that as humans, we know that we need to do these things, but sometimes you have in your head, oh, it's going to take this, it's going to take so much longer. It's like we don't have the budget for it. So how are companies tackling this at a very tactical level? Like, where's the budget coming from? How long does it take to get started? What are those things? What do those look like?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Business is business. I run one. I have, few hundred employees. I get it, right? It has to make good business, not just, so specifically there's proof, and we have lots of it, that there is actually a return on the investment here, because you're going to start to see less, like I talked about, MSK admissions to the ED, particularly if you're self-insured, which is where most employers you're going to see an uptick in PBM. And what I mean by that is that people get on their meds and they take them more regularly, which is what you want. And it's not just mental health medication. It's also physical health medication. You'll start to see a decrease in missed days and an increase in productivity. So every single vendor in the world that offers a point solution, and I can see your, listeners throwing up in their mouth right now, say the exact same things that I'm saying right now, but we have proof in the pudding. And I really believe that the reason that we're successful is that we're not just a tech platform. We have humans that can actually get involved when the situation calls for it. So follow the money. That's what I would say to employers, because it will pay back dividends, and it will forget about all kinds of things like retention. I mean, we could go on and on. I run a call center, as I explained, and we have two parts of it: the Andes, which we've talked about quite significantly, the licensed technicians, and then we also have a whole group that we call our ambassadors of compassion. And their job in the health plan world, which is who I sell to quite a bit, is to actually put people on the platform. So we get target lists where we will literally call them and get them on the platform. So it's a real call center, lots of call volume, et cetera. And my retention rate is through the roof. Like, I lose less than 20%. And in a call center, that retention can be up to 50%.
Wow.
And that's because we literally give people the opportunity to talk about mental health, experience mental health, feel that there's no stigma about mental health. We offer them interventions, not just our own intervention, but many others. I have a therapist on staff that literally, in other words, my employee is a therapist that will get on the phone at any point, at any time with these folks. we have to not just talk about behavioral health and policy around behavioral and mental health. We actually have to do things.
Okay.
And that's how I look at Pyx. It's not an expensive proposition. It just isn't.
Is it family wide? Like, is the plan helping that employee's family, or is it just helping that specific employee?
Generally, whoever is the insured, right? And that's HIPAA and all kinds of reasons. So it's the same in the employer space. You know, we haven't talked about this, but the AARP before the pandemic did a big study on loneliness and basically found that there is no statistical difference between age and gender on loneliness, meaning a 14-year-old is as lonely as a 65-year-old.
Oh, that's really surprising.
And so you think about the employer space, think about all those dependents, you know, there is a huge opportunity, not just to take care of your employee, but to really wrap your arms around the family.
Yeah, because I think about that, you know, I'm a mom, you're a mom, you know, and you cannot help but prioritize your family. It's just like, it's just natural. That's what happens. And so I think of, you know, if I had someone in my family, even if I wasn't experiencing loneliness, but I had someone in my family that did, to be able to know that they are also being taken care of is also going to free my energy up and my engagement. I'm certainly going to feel very different about my employer if they're helping me resolve those issues than if they're not.
100%. You know, I have a 13-year-old son, and they, you know, boys go inward when they start to go through puberty. And so he used to tell me everything, and now he's in middle school and it's like pulling teeth. And so I literally, you know, because he has Pyx on his phone, I'm like, don't feel bad about, mom won't know, you know, if you call in, and you know what I mean? And so I do think that this generation, particularly after being locked down for 2 years, is going to experience profound effects from loneliness. And there's a really interesting stat that says that if in your teenage years you get diagnosed with a mental health disorder and get put on medication, you have a 72% likelihood you'll be on that medication for the rest of your life.
Wow.
So think about how important it is to try to get ahead of those issues.
Yeah. I mean, I think about, like, our company has several universities as customers.
Yeah.
And I remember most of them became customers around 2020. And so we saw them transition from being normal university plans to how are we going to educate tens of thousands of students virtually. And the impact that we've heard from them about this, about the student population who their first 2 years of college, and in some cases, they didn't have interaction with other students.
Yeah.
And the students that then graduated and didn't have graduation ceremony, and they didn't, you know, these things that they worked for their entire life, and it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's horrible. You know, I mean, we could go on forever. And, you know, I often get asked, why is a technology solution the appropriate thing, particularly for that generation that's getting, you know, altered. I'll use that word, altered, by social media. The answer is that it has to be a technology solution because they're not going to do it any other way. But it needs to be a safe space. It can't be, you know, the one thing we absolutely don't do is connect people online to each other so that they can have like likes and dislikes or et cetera. It is a personal journey, and that's how we treat it. And it's between you and your Andy, should you choose to use one, and the bot. And it's important, you know, for these kids who are, it's interesting. My chief operating officer also has little kids, and they just did this really project about some of the most powerful or most profound things in their lives. They're 9, so just like you know, take it for a grain of salt. And neither of them put the pandemic on the list. And so when she asked her kids, like, why didn't you put the pandemic on there? And they said, well, gosh, that's really all I can remember.
All they can remember is the pandemic.
That's right.
Yeah, that's just
it's altering a generation.
Yeah. Well, and it did. I think it has changed so many things that we don't even recognize that it's changed yet. You know, so for us, it's a huge circumstance in the fact that there is 2 jobs for every 1 person looking for a job.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's
That has never happened. And so as an employer, if you want to get the attention of the people that are high quality employees that you really want to have work for you, I think that you have got to step beyond just here's your 401k matching plan. Okay, that's
yes.
fine, whatever. But if they're dealing with, and it sounds like if a third of the workforce is dealing with very real issues on a daily basis and they're not talking about it, then you have to have technology. To me, I don't even understand how you would operate a company without it. Certainly if you have a large employee base.
Yeah. I mean, what the operative word of what you just said there, you said there are 2 people who want a job and there's 1 job who want a job. That's what we have to dig a little deeper into. It's not that there aren't able bodies and jobs. That would be a completely different story. It's about who want to work. And the idea of want is not just about money. And
Right.
That's what we have to understand. People aren't anymore going and getting a job because they've got to pay their bills or they want to buy their first house or any of those things. They're looking for different kinds of resources and fulfillment. And you said it yourself, like if there's 2 jobs, you're going to go with the company that not only takes care of you, the employee, takes care of your family, is forward thinking about mental health, etc.
Right. Well, and I think too, we all are so much more aware. I mean, these conversations did not take place.
No, they didn't.
For the pandemic. And unless you were in like a small subset, you would have been in that subset where you had already identified it was a problem. But I think it fell on deaf ears in many ways. I just don't think people were, it wasn't thrown in their face. They did not have to address it.
Yep.
And that has completely changed.
Yeah. So we started in Medicaid very deliberately because we wanted to really address the most vulnerable population, and it's at the point now where I get on a phone with a health insurance payer. I do not have to convince them of loneliness. Do not. It is widely understood. People understand the economic impact, on and on. I get on the phone with the employer. I'm still educating around loneliness.
Oh, so that's very interesting.
The employer space is a bit behind recognizing the underlying causes of some of the things we've talked about.
So I have to say that is shocking to me because, I mean, I guess there's some other things that I find shocking too, that people don't value diversity and some other things, but I don't know how you could ignore it. It is literally on the news and on the front of papers and every type of internet news you could possibly imagine. It talks more and more about mental health. I don't know. I hate to hear that, but I think it explains maybe why some employers do have such bad hiring numbers.
Yeah, I mean, or they've put it into the spreadsheet that says this is going to be my attrition and I'm planning for it, and as long as it's not impacting my margin. I mean, this is what's hard about being committed to addressing mental health is also really understanding that eventually that's going to impact the very thing that is likely stopping you, which is your bottom line. It is the problem with healthcare in our country that it follows the money, whether you're an employer or health insurance payer, et cetera, but this is good business.
Yeah, I think that is the ultimate point. Taking care of your people.
Yeah.
And letting them know that you care about them is the way to hire and retain. And I love the fact that you've built a platform that helps people do that at scale. Obviously, it makes it far more affordable if you're using technology and you're not just relying on individuals. But the fact that you have this bank of Andes, is that right?
Yeah, the Andes, yeah.
The Andes that are there to talk to people and guide them through these challenging moments is outstanding. So I love, do you have anything else you would, want to share with our audience before we go as kind of like a point of make sure you do this or consider that, or, to maybe improve not just their own life, but their employees' life?
I mean, the only thing I'd say to your audience is as a business owner, I really have the same problems they do, there is always this constant push and pull. But what I realize, mostly just because of my personal experience, that I have really created a happier, more effective, productive, healthier environment by literally taking away the stigma around mental health. Like, it is, one of our what we call our BBOs, our beliefs, and then behaviors associated with those beliefs and outcomes. That's our culture. That's how we structure culture. Beliefs, behaviors, outcomes. One of them is bring your love to work. And no one talks about love at work. No one talks about mental health problems at work. And I have found that this has really made a big difference. So I would just say, as a business owner, less as an entrepreneur peddling their wares, is like, I get it. This is hard stuff. But the companies that go first will reap the benefits.
Oh, so true. Yeah, absolutely. So how do companies reach out to you?
Super easy. I'm just Cindy at Pyx Health. It's pyxhealth.com.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Cindy. I really appreciate you being here. You, every time I talk to you, you enlighten me, and I think that you've probably done the same for our listeners. Appreciate it. Thanks for doing this. Like, to have just, sort of a platform to have these kind of discussions is really important. So thank you. Thanks for listening to Diversity Cafe. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to see the growth of fair recruiting, please share it with others, post it on social media, and leave a nice review. To stay caught up on all the latest, follow This Way Global on Facebook, LinkedIn, or at thiswayglobal.com.